This is the Global Podcast Network, where executives and professionals connect, share, and inspire. Stay tuned for the conversations that drive success.
Now, what I love what she does is help us, inspire us to be creative. It's our belief that we're all creative. Doesn't mean you have to have this amazing artistic ability to create something. She's an art therapist. She helps us look at what we create and what may be coming up from that. Our thoughts, maybe our emotions and all of that. Today, we're going to look at different techniques. We're actually going to go, I believe, down a little bit of a rabbit hole in terms of painting, technique, different things that we can do. Again, more inspiration from our professional of the year. Barbara Robertson is back with us. How are you?
I'm fine, thanks. How are you doing, Steve?
Good. I just had a thought. When was the last time you painted something or took a brush in your hand and was working on something?
Actually, not too long ago. I've been creating a lot of kind of color mix surfaces that I like to do before I actually start a drawing, which I like to do on top of a surface that is covered with all kinds of different colors, just kind of swirled and spread onto the surface.
So let me see if I got that right. So you are experimenting with color, maybe technique, maybe texture, just messing around before you even actually draw something that you intend to paint.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh.
And it's a way of kind of tricking my brain that worries about what other people will think about my art. So I'm sitting in front of a big blank white canvas or a big blank sheet of paper without any marks on it, that's when that part of me comes up and starts to sort of nag at me and say, what if you put that mark in the wrong place? What if it's the wrong color? What if?
I love that
And
idea because it's getting you closer to the creation. So it's almost as if you've already done it before you've done it because you've tried some colors. And I have to believe that when you're messing around, you have an idea what you want to accomplish.
I do a little bit. With the colors, though, not so much. With the colors, I want the colors to tell me what they want.
So for
So
example,
if I start
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, if I start with a big blob of red and I put it, maybe in 3 or 4 places on the page, then I'm sort of like, okay, what wants to be with red today? And it's very intuitive process. I might on some days feel like, okay, the opposite. I want like a forest green with that red because I want as much contrast as I can get. But other days I might want pink or violet or lavender, something that's a cousin of red to be in there with it.
So, chicken or the egg. So let's say you're messing around with some colors. Would you be using, let's say you're going to do a tropical scene. You're thinking about, I'm going to do a house in Bermuda. A lot of them are lighter in color, pinks, yellows, little pastels, that kind of thing. Would you be messing with those colors with it in mind that you may apply it to that painting of the house in Bermuda? So you're going with lighter colors as you experiment?
No, I might actually decide to go with darker colors, like dark, rich greens and blues, because I know I'm going to come back with lighter, warm colors on top. So I want to give the image a surface that it can really kind of ride on top of and pop against.
Interesting.
And
That's got,
sometimes it's the other way around. Sometimes I just do messing around with color on paper. And after I feel like, okay, it's dense enough. There's enough movement here. There's enough different colors. There's enough blending. There's enough standing out. There's enough balance. then I might just have it out where I can see it for a while and decide what am I going to draw on that surface? What am I going to use that as the backdrop for?
Again, I love it because the pressure's off. It's playtime, but you're actually training. You're training for the game in a way.
In a way, that's true. And that was actually how I solved a creative block that I had for a while that had dug in pretty deep. I just started using paint that, might be just a little bit of paint left in the bottom of the tube.
Okay.
Okay, let's use up these paints. So the color selection was random because, you know, I hadn't determined ahead of time what colors were going to run low, but I could sort of pick them out of the bunch of tubes that I had and then squeeze them onto a piece of paper. And I discovered another kind of fun way to do that recently, which is to put little blobs of paint or big, depending on how you're feeling. Are you feeling scarce or abundant that day? So use the paint in whatever way fits. And then take a big sheet of plastic wrap or a couple of stretches of saran wrap and put it down right over the paint that's on the paper. And then you can use your hands, your fingertips, your whole forearms. You can use a roller like a brayer. You can use something with texture. And you start mushing the paint underneath the saran wrap. So your hands aren't getting messy, but the paint is sliding and slipping around underneath there. And so you can kind of make the colors merge into each other. You can make a little texture with different kinds of textured things kind of going over the top of the saran wrap and onto the paint. And then when you pull it off, the paint, if it's on thick, it'll kind of come up in little peaks like meringue sometimes when you
Sure.
take the beater out.
That sounds like fun. You're making it fun. No pressure.
Exactly. Yep. That's the whole
Wow.
point.
Have you ever done that and come up with something that this actually looks like this could be the painting? That I was just messing around. Call it a happy accident.
Yeah. 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 From time to time.
Hmm.
Yes.
Do you remember a time where you were creating something? I don't want to just limit it to painting. Where you had a happy accident, where you're like, look what just went down here, and oh wow, look what I've created something here.
Well, it's funny because I would actually sort of describe my last 2 or 3 years of creative efforts as all kind of falling into that category.
Hmm.
Because one of the other kind of things that I discovered was that if I took oil pastels and drew with them on top of a page that had paint smears, nicely spread and dried, but there were textures from, kind of using a spatula. So there's little edges of the paint strokes that are standing up. That an oil pastel kind of used on its side would let that texture and the color underneath come up in little fragments underneath the oil pastel. So the
Wow.
background would get integrated into the surface drawing. That was a happy accident because I started using oil pastels that way on top of painted surfaces, painted and textured surfaces.
I would have
And
never thought of that. I messed a little bit with oil pastels, kind of like them. I like regular pastels too.
uh-huh.
Goes back to childhood, a little affinity there. Um, Oil pastel's different. You know what? Can we go to an email because it's right here, like in what we're talking about.
Please,
Um,
absolutely.
Kathy is in Fairview, Texas, and says, "I've always loved to sketch, and I'm thinking about painting. Got any advice between acrylic and oil?"
Um, I know there are some people who swear by oils.
Hmm.
I started out using oil painting when I was in art school, and I have not gone back to them. I have reached a point where I really prefer acrylic, and there are points, pro and con for each one. What I like about acrylics is that They have a nice kind of luscious, spreadable texture like oil paints do. And now actually they come in all kinds of viscosity. So you can get really kind of stiff, paints that will keep a lot of texture in them. And you can actually get acrylic inks that are much more liquid and come in little bottles with eyedroppers. So
Hmm.
you can really do so many different things with the different kinds of acrylic that exist. I mean, you can do that with oil paint too by adding different kinds of medium to the paint. Um, you can add something to the paint that makes it dry faster or that slows down the drying too, depending on what you want. But what I like about acrylics is that you can just do layer on layer on layer. And it doesn't take long to dry. So if you like to use your color that way, then it really offers you kind of an extended time that you can go back in and work in a greater level of detail as you go. And then cleanup is much easier. It's water soluble, so the brushes don't get ruined if you forget to put them in the water soon enough. I mean, if you left them out overnight, the paint would dry on them, and that would be it for the brush. But it's not as hard to clean paintbrushes with acrylic as it is with oil. So just to expedite the process, I would go for acrylic.
Mm. I have tried a lot of mediums in my life. I've never done oil. I've never done it. And I'm trying to think back. Is that accurate? But I think it is. And I believe it's from when I was much, much younger, where there was all those almost like, skull and crossbone warning, where it cleanup is
Yes.
difficult. It's hard to get out of the brush. You got this, you got that. You can't blend. I'm like, I'm not doing it. I never
Yeah,
did.
it's just a little bit, it's not as complicated as it was back in the ancient days when I was in art school. There are odorless solvents for it now, and,
Mm,
a lot, things that make it a lot easier to work with. But, I mean, ultimately, it sort of comes down to what lights your heart up. I would get maybe 3 tubes of each kind of paint. You could just do red, blue, yellow, because those are the primary colors, and maybe white.
mm,
So you can mix any kind of color you want and see what kind of palette you can make, see how it handles, see how your hand feels with a brush,
mm,
um, moving it across a surface, whether you like a slick surface or a kind of textured surface that canvas has. A lot of people paint on just kind of sheets of masonite or that sort of manufactured wood type material
sure.
that is kind of slick and smooth. Also, with oils, you do need to put a layer of gesso on the surface, which is kind of a chalky white or clear sealer for the surface so that paint will adhere and not flake off.
You talk about painting back in the day yourself, but let's go way back in the day. What were they using? Yeah, when you think about it, how did they create, manufacture, paint, hundreds and hundreds of years ago, where you still had great color, durability, it lasted. What were they using back then? Any ideas?
They were actually using powdered pigments. I mean, it must have been a pretty expensive undertaking to be an artist. I mean, from what I understand, painters like Holbein and Rubens and those guys, they had crushed pigments that were from minerals, often, sometimes from plants, but mineral colors tend to, last much longer and be much less affected by light than plant materials. And they would mix them in with oil and a solvent of some kind until they had the texture that they wanted.
Hmm.
And I've read that one of the reasons that you don't see blue very often, and usually, like in Renaissance paintings, it's reserved only for images of Mary, the mother of Christ, because blue is the most difficult, rarest, and most expensive pigment to get. And so using blue actually indicated value of whatever it was being painted blue because you were using a valuable pigment to depict it.
Wow.
So there was a lot of symbolic, messaging in that kind of creative artwork too.
I can't imagine. You have your talent, you're going to paint, you find the board or whatever you're going to put it on, but now you have to make your own paint. Like right down to maybe crushing some minerals to get that done. There was a lot of work involved in that.
And often artists would have studios, and these were actually, if you think about it, kind of cool because they would be like apprenticeships. So you might start out as a
Hmm.
studio assistant who sweeps the floor and cleans the brushes at the end of the day
Right.
and makes sure that, paints that are on the palette get covered so that they don't evaporate before the artist comes back to use them or takes, I don't know how literate any of them would be, but surely some would be responsible for kind of keeping track of the proportion of this hue, this pigment to that pigment, or the pigment to oil. Somebody would be kind of keeping track. It's a lot of little tasks go into it. And then eventually they might get to start kind of trying to sketch out a composition on a canvas. And then they might get assigned to paint this one particular, cherub up in the upper left-hand corner or, a tree in the background. So begin to kind of learn the technique. And then a lot of painters actually did mentor other younger painters who later became, really high quality, well known painters who did beautiful work.
Do you feel that some of the masters, like you said, there could be a cherub in the left hand corner, there could be a pine tree in the lower right corner. Is it conceivable that that was done by an apprentice, an intern? We would not know.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
I think an expert, especially an expert for a particular historical period or somebody who really has become a connoisseur of a particular artist's work, might be able to tell the difference between
Right.
different kinds of brush strokes, different levels of color layer, just the techniques that an expert could sort of reverse engineer in their viewing of it. They'd be picking up details that you and I might never notice.
It's so interesting. Yeah, like I'm still fixated on the fact that they had to make their own paint. Like so many steps were involved even before they got to do any work. And it wasn't like, yeah, I'm going to spend a Sunday afternoon. I'm going to mix up all the paints for that project that I got coming up on Monday. No, this was an ongoing thing. And I'm sure they had to mix those paints in real time. It wasn't like, well, let me just store them. It's like, all right, well, I'm working on, the browns today.
Right, right.
Wow.
Yep, probably so. And I think that's why many painters had patrons,
Hmm.
because the patron would be somebody who was very wealthy and who wanted their lives to be legendary, let's say. They
Yes.
wanted to be documented in some way that showed, how hoi polloi they might be. And so often a patron would, pay the artist, support the artist in his studio. And I say his not because there weren't women painters, there were, but they were often wives or daughters or sisters of professional painters who sort of came in the back door and learned to paint that way. They were very rarely openly recognized in the culture in those days, in the Renaissance in particular.
I met somebody who has an affinity for history, going deep into history. And she discovered that somebody in her family was an artist in Connecticut. And this is Abe Lincoln around that time.
Ah,
And he was able to make the connections where he became the guy to paint presidents. And he would be in the White House. He painted Lincoln and some other dignitaries there, but that was kind of his thing. I just looked at the time. I know we were going to look at something. You think we still have like 4 minutes here? That we
it Well, you know what? I think I'll save that until next week because we've kind of gotten off on a little bit of a different zone here today. So I thought you said maybe there was another email.
Yeah, give me one sec here. Let me take a look and see if I can find that. Yeah, I need just a minute. What are you working on now? Tell us that while I'm working on this.
What I'm working on now is putting together an art, what I call an art installation. I have a big wall-sized tree, painting of a tree, which is intended to be a tree, the tree of knowledge in the Garden of Eden. And it has an apple hanging on it, which is the apple that tempted Eve. And it's also got one of these, I don't know if you've seen these little critters that people with 3D printers have started making. There are a lot of little snakes and dragons and lizards that have interlocking parts. And so they're very slinky when you pick them up. They're kids' toys, but I was at a wonderful flea market down in Florida a couple of weeks ago and ran across quite a few booths that were selling them. Picked up one I thought I was going to give it to my grandson, but when I brought it in and put it near my tree and the little apple hanging on the tree, I thought, oh, that's perfect for the serpent.
Wow.
So it's got some 3D parts to it and kind of a sun and a full moon. And then I've got portraits of people, starting with Eve. But then all the rest of the portraits are made from people that I'm familiar with in my life on candid photos that show them having some kind of unusual, not ready for the camera facial expression. Because what I wanted was not so much portraits of people as portraits of emotions being expressed on a person's face.
I can't believe you said the word emotions because this was the email I was looking for. And this is from Jessica. And our producer actually reached back to her, I think it was last week, because we were curious where she's from, Westfield, New York. And she says, I'm fascinated by art therapy. Do you feel one medium is better suited for certain emotions or subjects?
I would say the only thing I would say about that, there are different kind of feelings and sensations, sensory experiences that different kinds of media can create for a person. Generally, the rule of thumb is that the more fluid the medium, the more stimulating it is to use. So if you are sort of feeling emotionally almost overwhelmed, it would probably better not to use really wet tempera paint and really big brushes because once you start with that, it could be a thing. And you can see this more in littler kids or grade schoolers. That paint won't stay on the canvas because you want to make bigger movements with it. And pretty soon the paint is kind of splattering off the edges of the canvas and onto the easel. One child client that I had, I put up a big piece of craft paper on the wall and actually gave him wet paint and big brushes and let him whack the paint on the wall as a way of discharging anger for him. Another great anger tool is really hard, big crayons so that you can scribble with them and just layer and layer and layer and layer. And that also discharges energy in a way that is just so kind of core clearing. It's a very cleansing feeling to do that. If, on the other hand, your life is lots of chaos, I might say, let's just use a fine tip pen and come in small and just do a little doodle on a 4x4 inch piece of paper that is going to give you a sense of this is a domain that I can create to please myself. Just this small, I can put a little border around it, I can contain it. It can give me a sense of being big enough to handle whatever is coming up inside. So that's kind of how I think about it, whether the emotion is potentially overwhelming or one you want more of, one you want a different way to experience. Yeah.
That is really fascinating. And I just apply it to myself, and I think others do too. As you hear it, I've always been, got my flare marker, the old school, got to be the original, except no imitations. There's a difference.
Say it might be getting harder and harder to find those.
This is true. Like I freak out when I leave the cap off, like, no. But I will say this, just what you said. I like my little domain. If I'm going to doodle, I got a couple of minutes and I'm on the phone talking to somebody and I'll just, but I've never done the tempera paints all over the place. And I think it's because of what you just said, where for me, and as a, wanting to be a syndicated cartoonist back in the day, it was pen and ink. So it was just this one line, some blacks, some whites, and controlled. When I think of craziness with that, and that's out of control. And not that I'm a control freak, but I don't know. I guess you could look at the other side.
I think cartooning too is a lot about essence, about simplifying things down to the essential cues that get across what it is you want your readers, your viewers to grasp from the images you create. And so it's
you're right. You're 100% right. Yes.
Yeah, it's a delicate effort to kind of figure out.
But I never saw it that way, Barbara, until you just said it. But it's if you draw a cartoon, you have a direction. You want it to hit the mark. You want to invoke the emotion. You want to see the visual, contrast between the blacks and the whites. When it's a painting, it's kind of a free for all. Whatever you get from it, you get from it. Whatever I get from it, I get from it. But when it's a cartoon, it's very deliberate. I guess that's where that the word would fit. Interesting. I never thought of that.
Yeah. And in a way, you're sort of going to the heart of whatever it is you want to convey.
Right. But you want to make sure it hits the mark, though. That's the key.
Oh, exactly. That's the key. That's the art of it, along with the actual physical, visible art.
Yeah. Well, I never thought of that.
Yeah.
But you know what? That's not to say that I shouldn't go the other way and let loose. I've never.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
You might want to try that, and that's actually kind of the trajectory that my work has taken over the last several decades. Because when I was in art school, I was focused on doing very naturalistic, representational images of people. And I'm still doing images of people, but I'm much more interested in face and gesture now. And I'm interested in big size because I really like, just kind of being able to be loose and just kind of let things go and let the colors fall where they fall. And so it's my work is kind of a combination of both. So I can go back and forth between those.
What a lot of insight today. And this is not even what we were planning on doing. It's so interesting.
I can always, we start talking about art. You just never know which direction it's going to go. But that's the fun thing about it is there's so many different aspects to it.
Mm-hmm. It's wide open. Robertson Art Therapy LLC.com, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And email at brobertson.atr@gmail.com. Love to hear from you.
Yeah.
Or send it off to Steve to, what is it, Steve?
Instant feedback, steve@gmail.com.
Instant feedback.
And
we
welcome your work as well. We'd love to see what you got going on there. No judgment. We'll interpret as everybody sees it differently. And we've had people do that before. So we encourage you. If you're working on something, maybe we inspired you today. Let's send it our way. We'd love to take a look at it.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you have a question you're wondering about, send that our way too. Love to hear from you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Barbara. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
This is the Global Podcast Network, where executives and professionals connect, share, and inspire. Stay tuned for the conversations that drive success.